She was screaming into a blizzard when the world went silent. 1 second, her voice tore through the trees like a wounded animal. Then the snow swallowed it whole. Constance fell to her knees, both hands wrapped around her belly, which had just clenched so violently it stole her breath. The child was coming. Not later. Not soon. Now she gasped, one glove missing, the other soaked through. Her skin burned, then numbed. Her thighs shook. She tried to crawl, but her legs gave out, and her face hit the snow so hard she tasted blood. This was how it ended. Not with grace or help or midwives, but in the middle of nowhere, alone, forgotten, belly full of life, back full of shame. She hadn't seen a soul in 3 days. The stagecoach had snapped its axle on a frozen rut 20 miles east, and the last man who offered her help did it with his belt already half undone. She had run, walked, prayed. Now she couldn't even cry. The wind whipped the trees into ghosts, and her coat flapped open, exposing the bloated curve of her stomach, rising and falling in frantic rhythm. "Please," she whispered, throat raw. "Please, God, not like this." Her body curled again, harder this time, and she screamed, a ragged, final cry. She collapsed, snow sticking to her hair, to her lashes, to the curve of her hips. Then, in the quiet that followed, came the sound. A door slamming, wood creaking, heavy boots crunching fast and firm through snow. She tried to lift her head, but her vision blurred. A figure approached, tall, broad, wrapped in a thick wool coat lined with fur. His beard was wild, his eyes shadowed. He didn't ask questions. He dropped to one knee, slid his arms under her, and lifted her against his chest like lifting firewood. His voice, when he finally spoke, was hoarse but steady. "You're not dying out here." Then he turned, carried her toward the cabin door he'd just come from, and slammed it shut behind them with a force that shook the storm itself. The heat hit her like a second shock. One moment she was ice and wind and pain, and the next, fire roared beside her, snapping in a stone hearth as the man laid her on a bearskin rug with arms that didn't tremble. Constance tried to speak, but her lips barely moved. Her eyes rolled back, breath shallow, body tight as a bowstring. The contraction ripped through her again, and she screamed. That time, the walls heard her. The man moved quickly, no hesitation, no question. He knelt beside her, stripped off his coat, and tossed it over her legs. His hands were large and calloused, but they didn't shake. He pulled a knife from his belt and met her eyes just once. "I need to cut the dress." She couldn't reply, couldn't nod. But she didn't stop him. The blade slid through fabric in one clean motion, splitting her dress from hem to waist. The warmth of the fire met her skin. He worked in silence, tossing the ruined cloth aside, wrapping thick wool under her back. "Name?" he asked. She choked on the word before it came. "Constance." "You're in labor, Constance. Hard labor." She gave a half laugh that sounded more like a sob. "I noticed." He looked at her, eyes dark and steady. "You alone?" She nodded. "How far along?" "I don't know. Soon." He pressed a hand to her belly, gently, like testing wood for rot. "It's close," he said. "Minutes, not hours." Another wave hit her then, sharp, unstoppable. Her cry bounced off the logs and stone like a bullet. The man didn't flinch. He soaked a cloth, pressed it to her head, and whispered, "Breathe through it. You're not alone now." She didn't believe it. Couldn't. Men didn't stay. Men didn't help unless they wanted something in return. But he never looked at her like a woman. Only like someone he refused to let die. As the pain crested and her body begged for mercy, she locked eyes with the stranger kneeling in the firelight. And in his face, rough, scarred, silent, she saw no fear, only purpose. The kind of man who didn't run from storms. The kind who built cabins inside them. The pain came again, deeper this time, like something ancient pulling through her spine and belly, stretching her from the inside out. Constance arched back, fists clenched, a scream rising that had nothing to do with sound and everything to do with terror. She wasn't ready. She wasn't enough. She couldn't do this alone. But then, just before her voice could crack the air, he touched her shoulder. Not forceful, just firm. Steady. His voice cut through the panic like a blade. "You won't break." 3 words. That's all. But they struck harder than any sermon she'd heard back home. She turned her face toward him, breath ragged. He was kneeling beside her, sleeves rolled, sweat starting to bead along his forehead. He didn't look scared, just rooted. Present. She gritted her teeth, rode the contraction until it passed, then collapsed onto the blanket, chest heaving. "What's your name?" she asked, voice like gravel. "Don't need one right now." "I do." He hesitated, then said, "Elias." "Elias," she whispered, eyes closing for a second. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You still might," he said calmly, "but not today." His bluntness startled her, but there was no cruelty in it, just truth, the kind you could lean on when everything else collapsed. He moved to the fire, returned with a basin of hot water, and gently washed the blood from her thighs. No shame, no greed in his eyes, just care. She watched him, weak but curious. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I've buried enough things in this snow." That silenced her. Not from fear, but from understanding. He wasn't saving her out of duty or desire. He was saving her because once someone hadn't. And it left a hole so wide he couldn't let it happen again. Another wave of pain tore through her, and this time she didn't scream. She held onto his hand, rough, warm, alive, and breathed until the contraction passed. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away, just knelt there, silent as stone, and held on. When it ended, she whispered, "I'm still here." And he replied, just as quietly, "I know." The child slipped into the world without ceremony, coated in blood and silence. For one terrible second, Constance thought it hadn't lived. She stared at the unmoving bundle in Elias's hands, her own chest frozen, breath held like it might buy time. Then the sound came. Thin, sharp, angry, a cry. Alive. Her body collapsed into the floor with relief, tears falling sideways into her hair. Elias wrapped the baby in a worn flannel shirt, wiped its face with water from the basin, and tucked it into the crook of her arm, without a word. He didn't ask if it was a boy or girl, didn't ask who the father was, just placed the child where it belonged. She looked down and sobbed, quietly, violently, from a place deeper than pain. Her arms shook, her mind blurred, but the warmth of that tiny body against her chest rooted her to something solid. She expected Elias to stand, to nod once, maybe, and walk out into the snow. But he didn't move. He sat back on his heels, watching the fire, eyes distant but alert, like a man listening for danger that hadn't yet come. She spoke without looking at him. "I don't even know where I am." 3 miles north of Hollow Pines. No one comes up here in winter." "Why are you here?" "Because no one comes up here in winter." She looked at him, truly looked, and saw the edges of sorrow in his face. Not fresh, but settled like dust on a long, unused chair. "You lost someone," she said. He didn't blink. "A long time ago." "Wife?" "Daughter." That silenced her. A new cry escaped the baby, and her arms curled tighter. Elias rose then, finally, but only to place another log on the fire. "You'll need food soon. I've got broth and cornmeal. You'll rest here. As long as you want." "And after?" she whispered. He met her eyes. "After's yours." Then he turned and walked to the far side of the room. Not out the door, not into the storm. Just far enough to give her space, and close enough to remind her she wasn't alone. Not anymore. The baby whimpered before dawn, and the cabin's stillness cracked. Constance stirred, arms aching, milk not yet there, body sore in places she didn't know could feel. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts across the walls. She sat up slowly, biting back a wince, the baby warm and quiet against her chest now. But her tears came before she could stop them. Soft at first, then harder. Not from pain, not even fear, from the weight of it all. The days she'd walked alone, the silence of towns that turned their faces. The child she now held, wanted but heavy with the truth of everything she'd lost to carry it. She didn't mean to cry out loud, but the sob slipped free, sharp and sudden. She pressed a hand over her mouth, ashamed. Then she heard footsteps, quiet but certain, approaching from the dark corner where Elias had slept in a chair. She wiped her face fast, but not fast enough. He didn't speak, just knelt beside her bedroll and placed something gently over her shoulders. His coat, still warm, still smelling of pine and firewood. She clutched it before she could stop herself. "I'm fine," she whispered, voice cracking. He didn't correct her, didn't offer empty comfort, just said, "You don't have to be." That broke something in her. Not violently, but clean, like ice splitting at the first sign of spring. "I don't know what to do," she breathed. "With him, with any of this." Elias leaned back, resting one arm across his knee. "You wake up, feed him, name him, then do it again. That's enough." "What if I'm not enough?" "You are, because you're here." She stared at the fire, then down at the baby who'd fallen asleep again, mouth still twitching like he dreamed of light. "His name's Simon," she said. Elias nodded. "Simon's a strong name." She looked up. "Did your daughter have one?" "Ruth." Just one word. But it filled the room. She reached for his hand then. Not as a woman reaching for rescue, but as one soul steadying another. His fingers closed around hers without hesitation. The snow fell softly outside, but inside, something had shifted. Warmth where there had been none. Belonging where there had only been silence. Constance packed her things in the dark. What little she had, a cracked hairbrush, a torn journal, a silver locket with no picture inside. Simon was tucked against her chest in a sling, still sleeping, mouth open in soft surrender. The fire had burned down to coals, casting just enough light for her to move without sound. She wasn't leaving because she wanted to. She was leaving because she'd stayed too long. Warmth like this came with a price. She'd learned that. And Elias had given too much already. A place, his coat, his silence. She couldn't afford to grow roots in someone else's kindness. She opened the cabin door slowly, holding her breath, and stepped into the dawn. Gray, bitter, still heavy with frost. Her horse was where she'd left it, tethered to the post by the shed. Or so she thought. But when she reached it, the saddle was already cinched, a bedroll tied, a small pack of food hanging from the horn. She turned fast, and there he was, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. He didn't look angry, just tired. "You shouldn't ride yet," he said. "Your body's not ready." "I can't stay," she said. "I know." "Why did you help me, Elias?" He looked past her, toward the tree line where the sky was bleeding pink. "Because someone didn't help Ruth, and I still wake up with her name in my mouth." The wind picked up, tugged at her dress. "Do you think I'll make it?" "No," he paused. "But I think you'll try anyway, because that's who you are." She bit her lip. "And if I came back?" "Then I'd still be here." Her throat tightened. She walked to the horse, fingers brushing the saddlebag, then turned back toward him. "Thank you for saving me." "You saved yourself. I just opened a door." She stepped forward just once and pressed her hand flat to his chest. "Don't lock it behind me." "Never did," he said. And then she mounted, turned the horse toward the trail, and rode off into the morning light. Her child pressed to her heart, and the echo of his words wrapped tighter than the coat she wore. The chapel was nothing more than 4 walls and a leaning cross, tucked behind a trading post where no one asked names and everyone kept moving. Constance swept floors in exchange for broth, nursed Simon on a bench that creaked beneath them. At night, she curled beneath a threadbare quilt with her child pressed to her chest, whispering stories she made up as she went. But even when the boy slept, even when the wind outside went quiet, her mind returned to the cabin, to the sound of wood splitting, to the weight of Elias's coat, to the steadiness in his voice when everything else had fallen apart. She had left because she didn't want to need anyone, but she'd left her breath behind. One evening, a traveling preacher offered her a ride east. "You and the boy can come with us," he said kindly. "There's work and people." She thanked him, said she'd think about it. But when she held Simon that night, wrapped in a blanket Elias had stitched at the corner, he stirred, fussed, and let out a sharp cry. She hushed him gently. "It's all right, sweetheart," she whispered. But as the sound rang through the empty church, her heart clenched. The cry echoed against the stone, and all she heard in it was a name. Not her own. His. Elias. She laid back slowly, eyes wide open, and realized she had never really left. Not fully. Her body had ridden south. Her heart was still beside the fire. In the quiet. Where she was safe without being owned. Known without being named. In the morning, she packed her things. The preacher was already hitched and waiting. But she handed him back the promised meal and thanked him for his kindness. "You sure?" he asked. "Ain't much out that way but trees and snow." "That's exactly why," she said. And then she turned toward the hills, toward the road no one took twice, holding her son tighter than ever. Because not every love follows you. Some wait. And she had left someone worth returning to. She didn't knock. The wind did that for her, slapping the cabin door in dull, even rhythm as she stood outside, breath clouding in the cold. Snow had started to fall again, thin and slow, like ash from an old fire. Constance held Simon close beneath her coat, heart pounding not from fear, but from the weight of every mile she'd ridden just to stand there. For a moment, she thought maybe no one was home. Maybe she'd waited too long. Maybe it was foolish to think anyone, he, would still be there. But then, through the window pane, she saw the flicker. Firelight. Alive. Waiting. She pushed the door open. Slowly. Inside, nothing had changed. The rug was still crooked. The tools still hung on the wall. The bedroll in the corner was folded, not used, and Elias was sitting in the same wooden chair near the fire, carving a piece of driftwood into the shape of a horse. He didn't look up, didn't startle, just said, "You're late." She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I got lost." "Good," he said. "That means you found your own way." She stepped forward, blinking against tears. "I didn't know if you'd still be here." He set the carving down gently. "I told you, I don't lock the door." Simon stirred, letting out a tiny grunt. Elias stood then, walked over, and looked at the child, not reaching, not presuming. "He's grown," he said. "He missed the quiet," she whispered. "And so did I." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Elias stepped aside. She passed him, brushing his coat with hers, and walked to the fire. Saturday pulled Simon from her chest and laid him in her lap. When she looked back, Elias was still standing at the door. "You coming in?" she asked. He smiled, barely, but it was there. "Only if I'm welcome." "You always were," she said. "I just didn't know how to say it." He stepped inside, shut the door behind him, and the sound of the world faded. The fire crackled. The snow thickened. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel like a guest in her own life. The next morning, she woke to the sound of sanding, slow, steady strokes of wood being smoothed by a practiced hand. Simon slept beside her in a bedroll, freshly stuffed with down. The fire hadn't gone out. The cabin smelled like pine and ash. She rose quietly, wrapped herself in a shawl, and stepped outside. The sun had broken through the snow clouds, light slanting across the clearing like a blessing. Beside the shed, Elias stood hunched over a narrow bench, shaping thick cedar boards into something round and cradled. She watched in silence until he noticed her. "You always work this early?" she asked. "I never stopped." "What are you making?" He didn't look up. "Something soft to set him in." "You haven't held him." "I know." The sanding stopped. "I'm not ready." She walked to him slowly, boots crunching through snow. "You think I was?" He set the block down. "It's not the holding that scares me. It's the letting go." She stood beside him now, near enough to see the lines around his eyes. "You think he'll die?" "I think things I love tend to." Her voice softened. "He isn't Ruth." "No," he said, "but I still hear her sometimes. When the fire pops or the wind moves wrong." She placed a hand on the edge of the cradle in progress. "You built this even though you're scared." "That's the only way anything worth having gets made." They stood in silence as the cold lifted slightly. Constance didn't ask again, didn't force anything. She just walked back inside, unwrapped Simon from his blankets, and laid him gently on the bearskin rug. When Elias returned an hour later, hands still coated in sawdust, she stepped aside. "He's warm, federal, clean." Elias paused in the doorway, stared at the tiny body curled like a comma. Then, slowly, he crossed the room. He didn't reach for the child. He knelt beside him, sat cross-legged on the floor, and just looked. Simon yawned in his sleep, tiny arms stretching up toward nothing. Elias didn't speak, but he didn't move away either. And Constance knew. This was how he held things now, with time, with presence, with the kind of love that doesn't ask to be trusted. It simply stays. Spring came slow, inching across the mountain like a secret passed between trees. The snow melted first along the edges of the creek, then in the hollow near the cabin where Constance liked to sit and let Simon kick at sunlight. The world softened. So did she. She never told Elias she loved him, never said she'd stay. But she didn't leave, and he didn't ask her to. Each day they moved like two halves of something unspoken. Him cutting wood, her carrying water, Simon laughing in the background like the sound of something being rewritten. One morning, she woke to hammering. Not fast, not frantic, just sure. She wrapped herself in her shawl, stepped outside, and saw him building again. This time it wasn't a cradle. It was an extension to the cabin. A second room, already framed, roof half covered. "What's this?" she asked, arms folded. "Room," he said. "For what?" "You tell me." She smiled. "We don't need more space." He looked up, eyes squinting in the sun. You will, eventually. She stood in the doorway for a long time, watching him work. No plans drawn, no promise asked, just hands and wood and the quiet faith that tomorrow still mattered. That evening she cooked without asking what he liked. He cleaned the tools without needing to be told. Simon fell asleep in his arms for the first time, and Elias didn't flinch when the baby drooled on his shirt. They didn't speak much that night. But when the fire cracked and the wind rattled the walls, Constance reached for his hand beneath the blanket. He didn't move, just laced his fingers with hers, not to claim, not to protect, just to share the warmth. She had walked through snow with no destination, cried in churches where no one prayed for her, and given birth in a storm that should have taken her life. But somehow she ended here, with a man who never made her beg, never asked for her history, never told her what she owed, just gave her a roof, a fire, a room she hadn't asked for, because he saw what she didn't dare say. And if you felt that too, then subscribe to Echoes of the West. And tell us in the comments, have you ever been loved in silence, without conditions?